The Battle off Samar. The day tin cans fought battleships. Part 1. The Impossible Morning. October 25th, 1944. Dawn breaks over the Philippine Sea, east of the island of Samar. The morning is crystalline, the kind of tropical dawn that painters dream of capturing. The ocean rolls in gentle swells, deep blue fading to turquoise near the horizon. A light breeze carries the salt tang of the sea. The sky is clear, visibility unlimited. For the men of the United States Navy's Task Unit April 3rd, 77, call sign Taffy 3, it should be another routine morning of supporting the Leyte Gulf invasion. They have no idea they're about to fight the most one-sided naval battle in history, and win. Taffy 3 consists of 6 escort carriers steaming in a loose formation. These are not the fleet carriers that won at Midway. These are CVs, combustible, vulnerable, expendable, in the sardonic vernacular of the sailors who serve on them. They're built on merchant ship hulls, slow, unarmored, vulnerable. The Fanshawe Bay, the St. Lo, the White Plains, the Kalinan Bay, the Kitkun Bay, and the Gamber Bay. Each displaces about 7,000 tons. Each carries roughly 30 aircraft. Each can make, at absolute maximum, 17.5 knots, barely faster than a World War I destroyer. Protecting these 6 carriers are 7 warships. 3 destroyers, the Johnston, the Hull, and the Heermann. For destroyer escorts, the Samuel B, Roberts, the Dennis, the John C, Butler, and the Raymond. These are the escorts, the Screen, the Guardians. Destroyers displace about 2,500 tons. Destroyer escorts even less, around 1,400 tons. They're built for anti-submarine warfare, for screening larger ships, for hunting U-boats in the Atlantic. Their main armament consists of 5-inch guns on the destroyers, 3-inch guns on the destroyer escorts. Weapons designed to shoot down aircraft and sink submarines, not to fight surface engagements with capital ships. The hull plating on these destroyers is 3/8 of an inch thick. On the destroyer escorts, even thinner. The sailors call them tin cans, and it's not affectionate. It's descriptive. A heavy shell will pass through these ships as if through paper. They have no armor belt, no armored deck, no protection whatsoever against naval gunfire. They're fast, they're maneuverable, and they're desperately fragile. At 6:37 a.m., an anti-submarine patrol pilot from the St. Lo radios back to his carrier. He spotted surface ships to the north. The message is routine at first, probably friendlies. Admiral William Halsey's 3rd Fleet is supposed to be up there somewhere, covering the northern approaches. But something in the pilot's voice changes. He's closer now. He can see details. Those aren't American ships. The pilot's voice rises, urgent now, almost disbelieving. He reports battleships, multiple battleships, heavy cruisers, destroyers, a massive fleet, steaming directly toward Taffy 3 at high speed. On the bridge of the Fanshawe Bay, Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague receives the report. For a moment, just a moment, there's hope this is a mistake. But then the lookouts on the carriers themselves spot the pagoda masts on the horizon. Those distinctive tower-like structures rising from massive hulls. There's no mistaking them. Japanese battleships. And not just any battleships. At 6:45 a.m., the identification is confirmed. The entire Japanese center force is bearing down on Taffy 3. For battleships, the Yamato, the Nagato, the Kongo, and the Haruna. 6 heavy cruisers, the Haguro, the Tone, the Chikuma, the Kamano, the Suzuya, and the Chokai. 2 light cruisers, the Noshiro and the Yahagi. 11 destroyers, 23 warships in total, displacing more than 250,000 tons. Leading this armada is the Yamato, the largest battleship ever constructed. She displaces 72,000 tons fully loaded, more than all of Taffy 3's 13 ships combined. Her main battery consists of 9 18-inch guns, the largest naval rifles ever mounted on a warship. Each gun can fire a shell weighing 3,200 pounds, 1.5 tons, to a range of 26 miles. These shells are as long as a man is tall. The armor-piercing version can penetrate 16 inches of steel plate. The Yamato's armor belt is 16 inches thick. Her deck armor ranges from 7 to 9 inches. She is, quite literally, designed to be unsinkable by any weapon the United States Navy possesses, except possibly aerial torpedoes. The other Japanese battleships are nearly as formidable. The Nagato carries 8 16-inch guns. The Kongo and Haruna, older battlecruisers rebuilt as fast battleships, each mount 8 14-inch guns. The heavy cruisers carry 8-inch guns, sometimes 10 of them per ship. Even the Japanese destroyers mount 5-inch guns comparable to the main armament of the American destroyers. And the Japanese destroyers also carry the Type 93 Long Lance torpedo, the most advanced torpedo in the world, capable of 49 knots with a range of 22 miles. Let's be absolutely clear about what this means. The Johnston, one of Taffy 3's destroyers, mounts 5 single 5-inch guns. The Yamato mounts 9 18-inch guns, each of which fires a shell 70 times heavier than the Johnston shells. The Yamato's secondary battery consists of 6 6-inch guns and 24 5-inch guns. The Yamato's secondary armament alone outguns the Johnston's main battery by nearly 5 to 1. And there are 4 battleships in this force. 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 11 destroyers. This is not a battle. By any rational calculation, this is not even a fight. This is target practice. The Japanese can engage effectively at 25 miles. The American destroyers need to close to 5 miles before their guns are useful. The Japanese ships are armored against the largest shells in the American arsenal. The American ships have no armor at all. The Japanese are faster. The Yamato can make 27 knots, the cruisers up to 35 knots. The American carriers can barely make 17 knots. Admiral Sprague understands immediately that his ships are dead. All of them. The carriers, the destroyers, the escorts. Dead. There is no help within 100 miles. Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet has been lured north by a Japanese decoy force. The battleships that should be guarding the strait into Leyte Gulf are far to the south, too far to help. Taffy 3 is alone. Sprague's first orders are simple survival instincts. He orders the carriers to turn southeast, heading for a rain squall visible on the horizon. He orders maximum speed. He orders the carriers to make smoke, to pour oil into their boilers to create thick black chemical smoke that will hide them. He gets on the radio and broadcasts in the clear, no codes, no encryption, enemy surface force attacking, request immediate air support. He's shouting into the void, hoping anyone with planes or guns can help. And then Admiral Sprague does the only thing he can do, the only move available on the board. He orders his 7 escorts, his 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts, to attack. Not to make smoke and run. Not to conduct a fighting withdrawal. To attack. To charge directly at the Japanese center force and engage. It's a suicide order. Everyone knows it. But it's also the only chance the carriers have. If the destroyers can delay the Japanese, even for a few minutes, if they can disrupt the Japanese formation, if they can buy time for the carriers to reach that rain squall, maybe some of the carriers can survive. The destroyers won't survive. That's understood. But maybe the carriers can. At 6:50 a.m., the Japanese battleships open fire. They're 20 miles away, at the extreme edge of visual range. The first shells are enormous, each weighing as much as a small car. They take nearly a minute to arrive. The sound comes first, a sound unlike anything else in warfare, a freight train roar that builds and builds. Then the shells impact. The first salvo misses, but not by much. Columns of water erupt near the carriers, geysers reaching 200 feet into the air. The shells are color-coded, so each Japanese ship can track its own fall of shot. Red geysers, green, yellow, purple. It looks almost festive, almost beautiful. It is not beautiful. It is death. Calibrated and incoming. The Japanese have a range. The next salvos will be closer and closer, and then the carriers will start dying. Part 2. The Charge of the Johnston. Commander Ernest Edwin Evans stands on the bridge of the USS Johnston and watches the Japanese fleet appear over the horizon. He is 40 years old, a Cherokee from Oklahoma, a career naval officer who has commanded the Johnston since her commissioning in October 1943, almost exactly 1 year ago. He is a compact man, soft-spoken, deeply respected by his crew. When the Johnston was commissioned, Evans addressed his crew with words they've never forgotten. "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." No one got off. Evans served as part of the Johnston's engineering crew during her construction. He knows every pipe, every valve, every rivet in his ship. He's already fought her through 2 major engagements at Kwajalein and Hollandia, earning a reputation as an aggressive, fearless commander. The Johnston wears a banner on her bridge, the fightingest ship in the Navy. It's not a boast. It's a statement of intent. Now, Evans watches the Japanese mass resolve into full ships. He can see the Yamato's massive superstructure, the heavy cruisers flanking her, the smaller ships screening the formation. He knows exactly what he's looking at. He knows the tonnage, the armament, the capabilities. He studied these ships. He knows this is a fight the Johnston cannot win. At 6:51 a.m., Admiral Sprague's order comes through: small boys attack. Small boys, Navy slang for destroyers and escorts. Evans doesn't wait for clarification. He doesn't wait for the other destroyers to form up. He doesn't wait for tactics or coordination or a plan. The moment the order comes through, Evans rings for flank speed and turns the Johnston directly toward the Japanese fleet. The Johnston surges forward, working up to her maximum speed of 35 knots. White water boils from her bow. Black smoke pours from her stacks as her boilers are pushed to their absolute limit. She's alone. The other destroyers are still processing the order, still coordinating, still thinking. Evans is not thinking. He's acting. One destroyer, 2,500 tons, charging at a fleet displacing 250,000 tons. Evans keys the shipboard intercom. His voice, calm and matter-of-fact, reaches every compartment on the ship. What he says next will be remembered, verified, recorded in official action reports. These are his actual words, not dramatization, not invention. He says, "A large Japanese fleet has been contacted. They are 15 miles away and headed in our direction. They're believed to have 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and a number of destroyers. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can." In the engine rooms, in the gun mounts, in the torpedo rooms, men hear these words. For a moment, silence. Then, spontaneously, throughout the ship, the crew begins to cheer. They cheer because they understand what Evans is saying. They cheer because they know their captain will not ask them to run. They cheer because they're terrified and doomed, and they might as well make noise while they still can. They cheer because Ernest Evans has just told them they're going to die fighting, and somehow, impossibly, that's exactly what they want to hear. The Johnston races toward the Japanese fleet. The range drops, 15 miles, 14, 13. The Japanese battleships are firing now, concentrating on the carriers behind the Johnston, but some of their cruisers have spotted this lone destroyer, charging them in shift fire. Shells begin falling around the Johnston. Not the massive 18-inch shells from the Yamato. Those are still reserved for the carriers, but 14-inch and 8-inch shells from the Congo and the heavy cruisers. More than enough to obliterate a destroyer. The ocean around the Johnston erupts in shell splashes. Red columns, green columns, yellow. Each color marks a different ship firing, different trajectories, different times of flight. The Johnston weaves through this forest of destruction at 35 knots. Evans stands on the open bridge wing, watching the splashes, calling helm orders. Left rudder, right rudder, steady. The Johnston dances. For 9 minutes, 9 eternal minutes, she races through concentrated fire from multiple Japanese ships. Shell splashes bracket her so closely that seawater cascades over her deck. Shrapnel from near misses screams through her superstructure. Men are wounded by shell fragments. But the Johnston herself, impossibly, is not hit. Not yet. At 7 a.m., the range closes to 10,000 yards. 5 miles. This is the effective range of the Johnston's 5-inch guns. Evans orders, commence firing. The Johnston's 5 guns open up, firing as fast as the crews can load. 5-inch shells, 40 pounds each, explosive charges designed to detonate on contact, to tear apart aircraft and lightly armored targets. Against a battleship, they're almost useless. The Johnston's shells will bounce off the Yamato's armor belt like raindrops. Evans knows this, so he doesn't aim at the Yamato. He aims at the heavy cruiser Kumano, second ship in the cruiser column, and he aims high. He aims for the superstructure, the bridge, the fire control directors, the unarmored parts of the ship where men and electronics are vulnerable. The Johnston's guns hammer continuously. The fire control radar is working perfectly. The shells march across the Kumano's superstructure in steady, deliberate salvos. The Kumano is hit, and hit, and hit again. Fires break out on her bridge. Her fire control is damaged. She begins to slow, her formation disrupted. But Evans isn't done. The Johnston carries 10 Mark 15 torpedoes in 2 quintuple mounts. These are 21-foot long, 3,000-pound weapons carrying 600 pounds of high explosive. They're the Johnston's real teeth, the weapon that can actually sink a capital ship. But torpedoes have a range of only 6,000 yards, just over 3 miles. And to launch them effectively, the Johnston needs to get even closer, needs to present a firing angle, needs to slow down enough to ensure a good spread. Evans orders the Johnston to continue closing. The range drops 9,000 yards, 8,000, 7,000. The Japanese are firing continuously now. The ocean around the Johnston is a chaos of shell splashes. The heavy cruiser Kumano, despite her damage, is still firing. So are the other cruisers. The Johnston's luck cannot hold. At 7:05 a.m., at a range of 4,500 yards, barely more than 2 miles, Evans orders, fire torpedoes. The Johnston's torpedo tubes train out. 10 torpedoes splash into the water, their engines igniting, their gyroscopes stabilizing. 10 white wakes lance toward the Japanese cruiser column at 46 knots. The spread is textbook perfect, a classic amble pattern that gives the target no room to maneuver. And then Evans does something that saves his ship, at least temporarily. He orders emergency full left rudder and calls for the smoke generators. The Johnston heels hard over, turning perpendicular to her previous course, presenting her stern to the Japanese. As she turns, her smoke generators ignite, pouring thick white chemical smoke into the air. The Johnston disappears into her own fog, hidden, masked, invisible to Japanese gunners. For a moment, the firing stops. The Japanese have lost sight of their target. Behind the Johnston, underwater, 10 torpedoes run hot and true. The Kumano, massive and powerful, turns hard to port, trying to comb the wakes, trying to turn parallel to the torpedo tracks and present the smallest possible target. She almost makes it. 9 torpedoes miss. One is not. At 7:10 a.m., one of the Johnston's torpedoes slams into the Kumano's bow. The explosion is enormous. 600 pounds of torpex detonating against the cruiser's hull below the waterline. The Kumano's bow disintegrates. 40 feet of her forward structure simply ceases to exist, blown away in a microsecond of violent energy. Water floods into the gaping wound. The Kumano's speed drops from 35 knots to 12, then to 8. She falls out of formation, listing, crippled, out of the battle. She will survive the day, but she will take no further part in the fight. One destroyer has damaged a 13,000-ton heavy cruiser and disrupted the entire Japanese advance. The Japanese formation wavers, ships turning to avoid torpedoes, lines of fire obscured by smoke. Precious minutes pass. Minutes the carriers desperately need. But the Johnston has marked herself. She has announced to the entire Japanese fleet, this ship is dangerous. This ship drew first blood. This ship must be destroyed. Part 3. Into Hell. The Johnston emerges from her smoke screen at 7:15 a.m. She's still making flank speed, still maneuvering radically, still putting out smoke. But now the entire Japanese center force knows where she is, and they concentrate fire accordingly. The battleship Congo, 14-inch guns trained and loaded, spots the Johnston at 14,000 yards. Her guns fire in a coordinated salvo. The shells take 25 seconds to arrive. They arrive as a cluster, near simultaneous impacts along the Johnston's hull. 3 shells hit. The first 14-inch shell strikes the Johnston aft, penetrating into her after engine room. The explosion kills every man in that compartment instantly. The engine room floods. The Johnston speed drops from 35 knots to 17, then to 10. She's crippled, her mobility gone. The second shell hits the Johnston's aft gun mount, gun number 5. The mount is torn from its foundation and thrown into the sea. The gun crew dies instantly. The third shell strikes the bridge itself. Commander Evans is standing on the open bridge wing when this shell arrives. The explosion is catastrophic. The enclosed bridge is destroyed, everyone inside killed. The navigation equipment, the gyro compass, the charts, the radios, all destroyed. Shrapnel tears through the bridge wing. Evans is hit by shell fragments, 2 fingers blown from his left hand, lacerations across his body. His talker, the sailor relaying voice commands, is killed beside him. Other men on the bridge wing are wounded or killed. Evans staggers, blood pouring from his mangled hand. For a moment, he stands there, shocked, deafened by the explosion. Then he wraps his hand in a torn piece of his shirt, ties off the makeshift bandage with his teeth, and continues giving orders. The Johnston no longer has an enclosed bridge. Evans will command his ship from the open deck, exposed to the elements and enemy fire for the next 2 hours. The Johnston is hurt, but not dead. Her forward engine room is still operational. She can still make 17 knots. Her 4 remaining 5-inch guns are still operational. Her ammunition magazines are intact. And her crew, shocked by the violence of the hits, bloodied but not broken, returns to their stations and continues to fight. At 7:20 a.m., the other destroyers of Taffy, 3, follow the Johnston's lead. The USS Hull, commanded by Commander Leon S. Kintberger, turns toward the Japanese fleet and begins her attack run. The USS Herman, commanded by Commander Amos T. Hathaway, does the same. And behind them, incredibly, the destroyer escorts also turn toward the enemy. The destroyer escorts are smaller than the destroyers, more vulnerable, more lightly armed. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, the USS Dennis, the USS John C. Butler, the USS Raymond. These ships were built to hunt submarines in the Atlantic. They were never intended to fight surface actions against capital ships. Their crews are young. Many of these sailors are on their first deployment, barely trained, still learning their jobs. But when the order comes to attack, they attack. The Samuel B. Roberts, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Copeland, is typical of the breed. She displaces 1,400 tons. Her main battery consists of 2 3-inch guns, guns that fire 12-pound shells. Her crew calls her the Samuel B. with affection. She was commissioned only 6 months ago, in April 1944. Most of her crew has never been in combat before today. Copeland is 33 years old, a reservist, not a career naval officer. He was a civilian before the war, working in insurance. He's competent but not flashy, steady but not aggressive. He does not have earnest Evans warrior spirit, but he has something else, a profound sense of duty and an absolute refusal to abandon the carriers. When the order comes to attack, Copeland turns the Samuel B. Roberts toward the Japanese fleet without hesitation. The Samuel B. Roberts has a top speed of 24 knots. The Japanese cruisers can make 35. The Samuel B. Roberts is chasing ships that are faster than she is, more heavily armed, and effectively invulnerable to her weapons. None of this matters. Copeland orders flank speed and closes the range. The ocean is now complete chaos. The carriers are running southeast, pouring smoke, their aircraft launching in continuous streams. The Johnston, damaged but still fighting, is engaging the Japanese cruisers, her guns firing continuously despite her wounds. The Hull and Herman are making their attack runs, launching torpedoes, firing guns, dodging salvos. The destroyer escorts are charging. And over everything, The Japanese shells continue to fall. Thousands of pounds of steel and explosive raining down from the sky in colored geysers of death. At 7:25 a.m., the hull launches her torpedoes at the Japanese battleships. She's taken hits. Several 5-inch shells from Japanese destroyers have struck her hull, but she's still fighting. Her torpedoes run toward the Congo. The battleship turns hard, presenting her stern, combing the tracks. The torpedoes miss, but the maneuver forces the Congo out of position, disrupts her firing solution. More minutes gained. The Heermann closes to 6,000 yards and engages the heavy cruiser Chikuma. The Heermann's 5-inch guns fire continuously, scoring hits on the cruiser's superstructure. The Chikuma turns to bring her full broadside to bear. 8-inch guns against 5-inch guns. The weight of broadside is not even close. But the Heermann is turning, zigging, making herself a difficult target. And her radar fire control is functioning perfectly. Her shells continue to hit. The Japanese fleet, meanwhile, is closing on the carriers. The Yamato is firing her 18-inch guns at the carrier formation from 20 miles away. Each salvo is 3 shells. The Yamato fires in 3-gun volleys to avoid interfering with her own shells' trajectories. The shells weigh 3,200 pounds each. When they hit the water near a carrier, the geysers they create are taller than the carrier's mast. The carriers jink and turn, making themselves as difficult a target as possible, but they're slow and large, and there's only so much maneuvering they can do. At 7:50 a.m., the first carrier is hit. The Kalinin Bay takes a shell, possibly from the Yamato, possibly from one of the cruisers, that punches through her thin hull and detonates inside. Fires erupt. Men are killed, but the Kalinin Bay doesn't sink. Her damage control parties attack the fires. She continues to steam, continues to operate, continues to launch aircraft. The White Plains is hit by shells from the cruiser Tone. One shell passes completely through her hull without detonating. A dud, a miracle. Another shell explodes in her hangar bay. More fires. More casualties. The White Plains survives. The St. Lo is hit. The Kitkun Bay is hit. The Fanshawe Bay, Admiral Sprague's flagship, is hit multiple times. Shell after shell slams into the thin-skinned carriers. But the carriers are tough in unexpected ways. They're merchant hulls, built with watertight compartments, with redundant systems, with the kind of robust damage control that comes from civilian maritime engineering. They're not armored, but they're resilient. They take hits that should sink them and keep steaming. And all the while, the destroyers and destroyer escorts continue to attack. They're in among the Japanese fleet now, weaving between the heavy ships, firing at point-blank range, launching torpedoes, making smoke. It's not a battle line. It's not a coordinated attack. It's a melee, a brawl, ships mixing together in complete chaos. The Johnston, still fighting despite her wounds, positions herself between the Japanese heavy cruiser column and the carriers. The cruisers Haguro and Tone are trying to flank the carriers to get broadside shots. The Johnston interposes herself, her remaining guns firing as fast as the crews can load. At 8 a.m., the Johnston engages the cruiser Tone at 8,000 yards. Her 5-inch shells rake the Tone's superstructure. The Tone turns away. The Johnston then shifts fire to the cruiser Haguro. The range is down to 7,000 yards. The Johnston shells are hitting. The Haguro's upper works are being systematically destroyed. But the Haguro fires back. 8-inch guns against 4 5-inch guns. At 8:10 a.m., another 8-inch shell hits the Johnston, this time in her forward engine room. Now, both engine rooms are out. The Johnston goes dead in the water. For a moment, the Johnston drifts, powerless. Her crew works frantically below decks, trying to restore power, trying to get steering back, trying to do anything. On the open deck, Commander Evans stands at his post, his mangled hand wrapped in bloody cloth, watching the Japanese fleet close in. The Johnston has no power, no mobility, and limited ammunition. She should be finished. But the Johnston's crew performs a minor miracle. Auxiliary power is restored. Steering comes back online. The Johnston begins to move again, Not fast, barely 7 knots, but moving. Her remaining guns continue to fire. Evans positions his crippled ship to continue screening the carriers, to continue placing himself between the Japanese and the Americans he's sworn to protect. Part 4. The Samuel B. Roberts' Last Stand. At 8 a.m., the destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts closes to within 4,000 yards, just over 2 miles, of the Japanese battleship Congo and the heavy cruiser column. This is suicidally close range. At 2 miles, there is no possibility of missing. The Japanese cannot miss the Roberts, and the Roberts cannot miss the Japanese. Lieutenant Commander Copeland understands this is where his ship will die, but he also understands that every minute the Samuel B. Roberts survives, every minute she keeps the Japanese occupied, is another minute for the carriers to escape. He orders his gun crews to commence rapid fire. The Samuel B. Roberts has 2 3-inch guns. Gun mounts 1 and 2 forward. Each gun has a crew of 6 men. These men have trained for this moment, but training and reality are different things. They're being shot at by battleships. They can see the Japanese shells coming, enormous projectiles that look like Volkswagens tumbling through the air. They can see their own ship's fragility, the thin steel, the lack of protection. They know what will happen when those big shells hit, and they keep firing. The Roberts Fire Control Director picks the heavy cruiser Chokai as the primary target. The Chokai is a Takao-class heavy cruiser, displacing 13,000 tons, mounting 10 8-inch guns. She's 70 times the weight of the Samuel B. Roberts and carries 5 times the armament. None of that matters. The Roberts guns lock on and open fire. The 3-inch shells begin hitting the Chokai almost immediately. At 2 miles, with radar fire control, the Roberts cannot miss. The shells are small, only 12 pounds, but they're hitting at high velocity and they're explosive. They can't penetrate the Chokai's main armor, but they can do immense damage to everything unarmored. The Roberts gunners aim for the superstructure, the bridge, the fire control directors. They aim for the secondary gun mounts, the searchlights, the antennas, anything that can be damaged, and they fire as fast as they physically can. The gun crews are superhuman. They're loading, firing in a continuous cycle. The 3-inch guns aren't designed for this rate of fire. The barrels overheat. The paint on the barrels burns away. The barrels themselves begin to glow dull red, then bright red, then orange. The heat is so intense that men working the guns have to wear gloves and still burn their hands. But they don't stop firing. For 35 minutes, the Samuel B. Roberts fights a point-blank duel with ships that outweigh her 20-to-1. She fires more than 600 3-inch shells. 600. The gun barrels are ruined. No longer rifled, just smooth tubes glowing with heat. But the shells keep going out, keep hitting, keep doing damage. The Chokai is hit more than 40 times. Her superstructure is wrecked. Fires burn out of control. Her fire control director is destroyed. Several of her 8-inch gun mounts are knocked out. One shell from the Roberts penetrates into the Chokai's steering gear room and jams her rudder. The cruiser begins to circle, unable to steer, her formation broken. The Roberts also fires her torpedoes. She carries 3 Mark 15 torpedoes, a tiny battery compared to a destroyer's 10, but still deadly. At 8:15 a.m., at a range of 3,500 yards, Copeland orders, fire torpedoes. 3 White Wakes lance toward the Japanese formation. 1 torpedo hits. It strikes the Chokai amidships, the explosion tearing a 40-foot hole in her hull below the waterline. The Chokai begins to list, flooding, fire spreading. She will sink later that day, one of only 2 Japanese heavy cruisers lost at Samar. A 1,400-ton destroyer escort has killed a 13,000-ton heavy cruiser. But the ocean is catching up with the Samuel B. Roberts. She's been hit now. Smaller caliber shells, 5-inch and 6-inch, have struck her multiple times. She's still firing, still moving, but she's hurting. And then, at 8:51 a.m., her luck runs out. A 14-inch shell from one of the Japanese battleships, probably the Congo, hits the Samuel B. Roberts amidships. The shell penetrates her thin hull and detonates in the forward engine room. The explosion is catastrophic. The engine room is destroyed, everyone inside killed instantly. The Roberts goes dead in the water. Steam pressure drops to 0. Power fails throughout the ship. And the Japanese are not done. More shells hit. An 8-inch shell penetrates the aft magazine. The explosion that follows tears the Roberts' stern apart. Another shell hits the bridge, collapsing the structure, killing men. Another hits the forward gun mount, destroying the weapon. The Roberts is being systematically destroyed, shell by shell, hit by hit. At 8:55 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Copeland gives the order to abandon ship. The Roberts is sinking, her hull torn open, her decks awash. The crew goes into the water. Many are wounded. Some are trapped below decks and go down with the ship. The survivors cling to life rafts and debris, watching their ship die. The Samuel B. Roberts rolls onto her port side at 9:05 a.m. Her screws are still visible, still turning slowly, her engines long dead, but momentum carrying the shafts. And then she slips beneath the surface, stern first, taking with her 90 men, nearly half her crew. The destroyer escort that fought like a battleship is gone. But she took the Chokai with her. And she bought time. Precious, irreplaceable time. Part 5. The Air War. While the surface action rages, another battle is being fought 3,000 feet above the ocean. The aircraft of Taffy 3 are launching continuously from the carriers, taking off even as the ships maneuver radically to avoid shells, even as Japanese fire falls around the flight decks. This is chaos. There is no time for coordination, no time for proper briefings or tactical planning. Pilots run to their aircraft, engines already turning, deck crews still fueling and arming. Many planes launch with whatever ordnance happens to be loaded. Some have torpedoes. Some have bombs. Some have depth charges intended for submarines. Some have nothing but bullets. The problem is simple. None of these aircraft are properly equipped to attack heavily armored warships. Taffy 3's carriers are equipped for ground support missions, for attacking Japanese positions on Leyte, for hunting submarines. They carry general-purpose bombs, not armor-piercing bombs. They carry depth charges, not ship-killing torpedoes. A general-purpose bomb might damage a destroyer. Against a battleship, it's almost useless. But the pilots launch anyway. They have no choice. Below them, the carriers are dying. The destroyers are dying. If the pilots don't attack, if they don't do something, anything to disrupt the Japanese, then everyone dies. Lieutenant Commander Edward Huxtable, leading the fighter squadron from the Gambier Bay, launches with 8 F-6F Hellcat fighters. His planes are armed with .50 caliber machine guns and 5-inch high-velocity aerial rockets, HVR. These rockets are designed to attack ground targets, not ships. But they're what he has. Huxtable forms up his fighters and dives on the Japanese cruiser column. The Japanese ships are prepared for air attack. Every ship in the center force bristles with anti-aircraft guns. The battleships carry dozens of 25mm machine cannons and 127mm high-angle guns. The cruisers are similarly armed. When the American aircraft come in, the sky fills with black puffs of exploding shells, tracers arcing up in streams of light, proximity-fused shells detonating near the aircraft. Huxtable's fighters dive through this hell. The HVR rockets launch from their wing rails, trailing smoke, streaking toward the cruisers. Most miss. Unguided rockets are inaccurate at best. But a few hit. They strike the cruiser tone, exploding against her superstructure, starting fires. The damage is minimal, but the attack forces the tone to maneuver, to turn away, to disrupt her firing solution on the carriers. More aircraft arrive. TBM Avengers, torpedo bombers, some carrying torpedoes, some carrying depth charges, some carrying bombs that retrieve continue. The pilots with torpedoes make their runs, flying low and slow, setting up their attack angles. It's brutally dangerous work. The Avengers have to fly straight and level for the final attack run, have to present themselves as perfect targets for the Japanese gunners. Several Avengers are shot down, exploding in midair or crashing into the sea. But some torpedoes launch, some run true. The Japanese ships turn hard, trying to avoid them. More time bought, more disruption. The pilots with depth charges have a different problem. Depth charges are designed to sink submarines. They're set to detonate underwater at a specific depth. They're useless against surface ships, but the pilots attack anyway, hoping a near miss might do damage, hoping the disruption alone will help. They dive on a Japanese battleships, release their depth charges, pull up hard through the flak. Most charges detonate harmlessly in the water. A few explode close enough to shock Japanese hull plating, to rattle equipment, to frighten crews. It's not much, but it's something. And then there are the pilots with nothing. Pilots who launched with empty bomb racks, with only their machine guns, or pilots who have expended all their ordnance. By all logic, these pilots should return to the carriers to rearm. But the carriers are under fire, maneuvering wildly, their flight decks unusable. And the pilots can see the surface action below. They can see the destroyers dying, can see the carriers being hit. They cannot just abandon them. So these pilots make dry runs. They dive on Japanese ships with no weapons at all, hoping to distract the gunners, hoping to force the ships to maneuver. It's psychological warfare conducted at 300 miles per hour. A pilot will roll into a dive, pointing directly at a Japanese cruiser, screaming down as if on an attack run. The Japanese gunners, not knowing the plane is empty, fire at it. The ship's captain, seeing the attack coming, orders evasive maneuvers. The cruiser turns, loses speed, breaks formation, and the American plane pulls up, circles, and does it again. Ensign Hans Jensen, flying an FM-2 Wildcat from the Kitkun Bay, makes 18 attack runs on Japanese ships. 18. He fires all his ammunition on the first 3 runs. The remaining 15 runs are bluff, nothing but bluff. Jensen dives on the battleship Haruna again and again, forcing the battleship to turn, to maneuver, to disrupt her firing. He shot it continuously. His aircraft is hit multiple times. He keeps diving. Lieutenant Paul Garrison, flying an Avenger, runs out of ammunition attacking a Japanese destroyer. Rather than leave, he continues to make runs, diving so low that his aircraft's wheels nearly touch the destroyer's masts. On one pass, Garrison pulls out his service pistol, a .38 caliber revolver, and fires it at the destroyer from his cockpit. 6 shots. The destroyer is 30,000 tons of steel. The pistol might as well be a slingshot. But Garrison fires anyway because doing nothing is not an option. The Japanese captains, watching these relentless attacks, have no way of knowing which planes are armed and which are not. They have to assume every dive is real, every attack deadly. So they maneuver. They turn away. They waste time. And time is what the carriers desperately need. By 8:30 a.m., aircraft from other Taffy units, Taffy 1 and Taffy 2, further south, begin to arrive. These planes are properly armed with armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes. They add their attacks to the chaos, diving on the Japanese battleships and cruisers. The cruiser Suzuya is hit by a bomb that penetrates her deck and detonates in her machinery spaces. She loses power, falls out of formation. The cruiser Chikuma takes multiple bomb hits and a torpedo. She begins to sink. The air crews are relentless. They land, rearm, and launch again. Some pilots fly 4, 5, 6 missions that morning. They're exhausted, running on adrenaline and desperation. Many aircraft are damaged, riddled with flak holes, engines smoking. Pilots land on any carrier that has a clear deck, regardless of which ship they're assigned to. It's organized chaos, barely organized at all, but it's working. Part 6. The Death of the Johnston. At 9 a.m., the Johnston is still fighting. She's been hit more than 40 times now. Her hull is a sieve, torn by shells ranging from 5-inch to 14-inch caliber. Both engine rooms are destroyed. Her aftergun mount is gone. Her bridge is wrecked. Fires burn throughout the ship. She's listing to port, taking on water, settling lower in the sea with each passing minute. She can barely make 5 knots, steering manually from the stern because all her navigation equipment is destroyed. And she's still firing. Gun mounts 1, 2, 3, and 4 Her remaining 4 5-inch guns continue to engage the Japanese fleet. Her ammunition is almost gone, but what's left is being expended as fast as the crews can work. Commander Evans, his hands still wrapped in bloody cloth, stands on the open deck and continues to direct his ship's fire. The Japanese destroyer squadron has been ordered to finish the Johnston. Several Japanese destroyers close in, circling the crippled American destroyer, firing from close range. The Johnston's remaining guns shift fire, engaging the Japanese destroyers. At this range, under 3,000 yards, even 5-inch guns can do serious damage to a destroyer. The Johnston hits several Japanese destroyers, damaging them, forcing them to back off. But there are too many of them. At 9:20 a.m., a Japanese destroyer closes to point-blank range and fires a torpedo. The torpedo hits the Johnston amidships. The explosion breaks her keel. Water floods in through the massive hole. The Johnston's list increases to 20 degrees, 30 degrees. She's going down, and everyone knows it. Evans gives the order to abandon ship. The crew begins going over the side into the water. Many are wounded. Some are trapped below decks, unable to escape the flooding compartments. The Johnston's crew had numbered 327 men when the battle started. By now, 186 are dead or will die in the water. Evans himself is last to leave. He's seen on deck, standing near the bridge, watching his crew abandon ship. And then, in the chaos and the smoke, he disappears. His body is never found. Whether he went down with the ship, whether he was swept overboard, whether he was killed by a final shell, no one knows. Commander Ernest E. Evans, the Cherokee warrior who charged a battleship fleet, is gone. At 9:45 a.m., the Johnston rolls onto her port side and sinks. As she goes down, something extraordinary happens. A Japanese destroyer that had been pursuing her comes to a stop. The Japanese captain orders his crew to attention, and the Japanese sailors, standing on their deck, salute the sinking American destroyer. It's a moment of respect, warrior to warrior, an acknowledgement of courage that transcends nationality and war. The Johnston fought well. She fought beyond all reasonable expectation, and her enemies recognized it. The Johnston survivors cling to life rafts and debris in the water. They'll drift for 2 days before being rescued, many dying of wounds or exposure. Of the 327 men who served on the Johnston, 141 survive. Commander Ernest Evans is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the first Native American in the Navy to receive the decoration in World War II. The citation reads, in part, outgunned and outmaneuvered by the enemy's superior speed and firepower, Commander Evans boldly led his destroyer into the teeth of the Japanese fleet, exchanging fire with all calibers of enemy guns. Part 7. The Fog of War. At 9:20 a.m., Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, commanding the Japanese center force from the battleship Yamato, faces a decision. His fleet has been in continuous action for nearly 3 hours. He's sunk one American escort carrier. The Gambier Bay finally succumbed to accumulated damage and went down at 9:07 a.m. He's damaged several others. He's destroyed multiple American destroyers and escorts. But the American resistance has been fierce, far fiercer than anticipated. Kurita's ships are scattered across miles of ocean, their formation completely disrupted by the American attacks. His cruisers have been torpedoed, bombed, shelled. The Kumano is crippled, barely making headway. The Suzuya is sinking. The Chokai is sinking. The Chikuma is heavily damaged. His destroyers have been hit. Even the Yamato has taken bomb damage, though nothing that threatens her operational status. But more troubling is what Kurita doesn't know. He doesn't know he's been fighting escort carriers, not fleet carriers. The American ships have fought so fiercely, the American aircraft have been so numerous, that Kurita believes he's engaged a major fleet carrier group, possibly the same carriers that ambushed his force in the Sea Beyond Sea the day before. He doesn't know that Halsey's Third Fleet is nowhere near here. He doesn't know that the way to Leyte Gulf is essentially open, that the invasion fleet is vulnerable. What Kurita does know is that he's been under continuous air attack for hours. His ships report aircraft all around them, more appearing constantly. He knows some of his best cruisers are sinking. He knows the American ships are still firing, still attacking, still refusing to die. And he's receiving reports, false reports, as it happens, that American battleships are approaching from the south. At 9:11 a.m., Kurita orders his fleet to cease pursuit and regroup. He needs to reform his scattered ships, assess damage, consolidate his force. The American carriers are still visible on the horizon, still running, but Kurita orders his ships to break off contact. For Admiral Sprague and the men of Taffy 3, this seems impossible. The Japanese are winning. The Japanese have sunk ships, damaged others, and are still overwhelmingly superior in firepower. Why would they stop? But the Japanese formation begins to turn. The battleships come about. The cruisers follow. The destroyers form a screen. And the entire center force steams north, away from Leyte Gulf, away from the carriers, away from the battle. Kurita's decision will be debated for decades. Some historians call it a failure of nerve. Others call it prudent. He didn't know what forces might be converging on him, and prudence suggested consolidating rather than advancing into potentially superior forces. Still others blame the confusion of battle, the fog of war, the chaos of conflicting reports. Kurita himself, in post-war interviews, said he believed he'd engaged fleet carriers, not escort carriers, and that he expected to encounter significant resistance closer to Leyte Gulf. Whatever the reason, at 9:25 a.m., the battle off Samar effectively ends. The Japanese center force withdraws to the north. The carriers of Taffy 3, battered and bloody but still afloat, slow their headlong flight. The surface action is over, but the dying is not over. The St. Lo, one of Taffy 3's carriers, is hit at 10:50 a.m. by a kamikaze aircraft, one of the first organized kamikaze attacks of the war. The aircraft crashes into the St. Lo's flight deck, and its bomb detonates in the hangar bay. Secondary explosions follow as stored ammunition and fueled aircraft explode. The St. Lo sinks in 30 minutes, taking 113 men with her. The survivors of the sunken ships, the Johnston, the Hull, the Samuel B, Roberts, the Gambier Bay, drift in the water. Many are wounded. Sharks are in the water, drawn by blood. The men wait for rescue, not knowing if rescue will come. Some die of wounds. Some die of exposure. Some simply disappear beneath the waves, too exhausted to continue. Rescue ships arrive over the next 2 days. Destroyers and destroyer escorts from other task groups, alerted to the battle, steam to the area and begin picking up survivors. The water is scattered with debris, life rafts, floating bodies. The rescuers work methodically, pulling exhausted men from the sea, treating wounds, identifying the dead. Part 8. The Reckoning. When the full reports come in, when the tally is complete, the losses are staggering. Taffy 3 lost the escort carriers Gambier Bay and St. Lo. Lost the destroyers Johnston and Hull. Lost the destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts. More than 1,000 American sailors dead. Another 1,000 wounded. Ships sunk, aircraft destroyed. Careers ended in the space of 3 hours. But Taffy 3 accomplished its mission. The carriers they were protecting, the jeep carriers with their unglamorous mission of ground support, survived. The invasion fleet in Leyte Gulf was never threatened. The troops on the beaches never knew how close the Japanese came to disrupting their entire operation. The Japanese center force, the most powerful surface fleet Japan had left, turned away without accomplishing its objective. Admiral Sprague, in his after-action report, wrote, "The failure of the enemy main body and encircling light forces to completely wipe out all vessels of this task unit can be attributed to our successful smokescreen. Our torpedo counterattack, continuous harassment by bomb, torpedo and strafing air attacks, timely maneuvers, and the definite partiality of Almighty God." That last phrase, the definite partiality of Almighty God, was not a casual religious reference. Sprague, a pragmatic officer not given to superstition, genuinely believed that divine intervention was the only explanation for Taffy 3's survival. By every calculation, every analysis, every tactical assessment, Taffy 3 should have been annihilated. And yet they survived. The Japanese, meanwhile, withdrew without achieving their objective. The center force, so powerful on paper, had been fought to a standstill by a force 1/20th its size. Admiral Kurita faced intense criticism after the war, accused of timidity, of failing to press the attack, of losing his nerve. But Kurita maintained he made the best decision possible with the information he had. He believed he'd fought a major fleet action against superior forces. He believed he'd accomplished a tactical victory. He didn't realize until later that he'd fought escort carriers and destroyers, not the fleet carriers and battleships he thought he was engaging. The Battle off Samar entered naval history as one of the most lopsided actions ever fought and one of the most inspiring. Military analysts study it still, trying to understand how such a mismatch resulted in an American tactical victory. The usual explanations focus on several factors. The aggressive tactics of the American destroyers disrupted the Japanese formation and prevented a coordinated attack. The continuous air attacks, even by poorly armed aircraft, forced the Japanese to maneuver defensively rather than offensively. The smoke screens obscured vision and made accurate gunnery nearly impossible. The confusion of battle led Admiral Kurita to overestimate American strength and underestimate his own advantage. And perhaps, as Admiral Sprague believed, divine providence played a role. But at the core of it, the battle off Samar was won by men who refused to accept the inevitable. Commander Ernest Evans could have positioned the Johnston to screen the carriers from a distance, could have fired at long range and hoped for the best. Instead, he charged alone into a fleet that outweighed his ship 100-1. The crew of the Samuel B. Roberts could have hung back, could have preserved their ship for another day. Instead, they closed the 2 miles and fought until their guns glowed red and their ships sank beneath them. The pilots could have saved their ammunition, could have returned to base, could have made excuses. Instead, they dove on battleships with empty guns and pistols. This was not tactical brilliance. This was not superior technology. This was courage, pure and absolute. This was men deciding that their lives were less important than their mission, that their survival was less important than the survival of others, that the only unacceptable option was doing nothing. Commander Evans received the Medal of Honor posthumously. Lieutenant Commander Copeland of the Samuel B. Roberts received the Navy Cross. So did Commander Hathaway of the Heerman. Hundreds of other medals were awarded: Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, Navy, and Marine Corps medals. The citations all use similar language: courage, devotion to duty, disregard for personal safety. But the words feel inadequate. How do you properly describe charging a battleship in a destroyer? How do you adequately honor men who fired their guns until the barrels melted? Part 9. The Aftermath and Legacy. The survivors of Taffy 3 never forgot October 25, 1944. Many suffered from what would later be called post-traumatic stress disorder, though in 1944 it wasn't diagnosed or treated. They had nightmares about shell splashes, about watching their ships sink, about floating in shark-infested waters. Some couldn't speak about the battle for years. Others couldn't stop speaking about it, couldn't stop reliving those hours when they should have died, but didn't. The survivors formed associations, stayed in contact, attended reunions. They gave interviews to historians, wrote memoirs, preserved the story. Because they understood that what happened off Samar was extraordinary, was worth remembering, was worth telling to future generations. The Japanese survivors had their own perspective. Many Japanese officers who fought at Samar expressed admiration for the American tactics, for the ferocity of the American attack. The Japanese destroyer captain who saluted the sinking Johnston was not alone in his respect. Japanese naval tradition honored courage and fighting spirit above almost everything else, and the Americans at Samar demonstrated both in abundance. Admiral Kurita lived until 1977, haunted by his decision to withdraw. He faced a naval court of inquiry after the war. Not a court-martial, but an investigation into his actions. The inquiry concluded that his decision, while questionable, was not criminal or cowardly. He had made a judgment call in the fog of war. But Kurita never escaped the criticism, never stopped second-guessing himself. In interviews late in life, he remained defensive about his decision, insisting he'd done the right thing given the information available. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, of which Samar was one part, marked the effective end of the Japanese Navy as a fighting force. Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 9 destroyers across the various actions at Leyte. The center force, even though it survived Samar, was too damaged and depleted to pose a serious threat going forward. Japan's naval power, built over decades, was shattered in 3 days of fighting. The Battle off Samar specifically demonstrated several tactical and strategic lessons that naval strategists study to this day. First, that aggressive tactics can overcome material inferiority. The American destroyers' charges disrupted the Japanese formation so completely that the Japanese never fought as a coordinated fleet. Second, that confusion and lack of information are as powerful as any weapon. Kurita's uncertainty about what he faced led him to withdraw from a battle he was winning. Third, that courage is force multiplier. The sheer audacity of the American attacks convinced the Japanese they faced a more powerful force than they actually did. But perhaps the most important lesson is that desperate men are dangerous men. The sailors of Taffy 3 had no illusions about their chances. They knew they were going to die. That knowledge freed them. They fought without hesitation, without holding back, without considering retreat or surrender. They fought the way cornered animals fight, the way men fight when they have nothing left to lose. And that kind of fighting is terrifying to face, no matter how superior your forces. The Battle off Samar has been called the greatest upset in the history of naval warfare. It's been called the battle that saved the Philippines. It's been called the last stand of the Tin Can sailors. All of these descriptions are accurate, but none of them quite capture the totality of what happened that morning. What happened off Samar was that men decided mathematics didn't matter. They decided that 2 + 2 could equal 5 if they wanted it badly enough. They decided that 1,400 tons could fight 13,000 tons, that 5-inch guns could challenge 18-inch guns, that survival was optional but duty was not. They decided wrong, of course. They couldn't really win. The math was the math. Physics was physics. But they fought anyway. And somehow, impossibly, they didn't lose. They held the line long enough. They did enough damage. They created enough confusion. They bought enough time. And when the smoke cleared and the guns fell silent, the carriers were still afloat, the invasion was still secure, and the mission was accomplished. That's what happened off Samar. 7 ships stopped 23. Tin Cans fought battleships, and the Tin Cans won. Not because they were stronger or better armed or more advanced. They won because they refused to lose. They won because men like Ernest Evans, when told to attack a superior force, didn't hesitate or question or doubt. They simply attacked. The Japanese called it a defeat. The Americans called it a miracle. Historians call it improbable. But the men who were there, the survivors who floated in the water and watched their ships sink and somehow lived to tell about it, they called it what it was. They called it their duty. And they did it. Epilogue, remembrance. Today, the wrecks of the Johnston, the Hull, the Samuel B, Roberts, and the Gamber Bay rest on the seafloor off Samar, in water more than 4 miles deep. They're the deepest shipwrecks in the world, far deeper than the Titanic, in total darkness and crushing pressure. In recent years, deep-sea exploration teams have located some of these wrecks, photographed them, documented them. The ships lie where they fell, still bearing the scars of battle, still testimony to what happened on October 25th, 1944. The survivors are nearly all gone now. The youngest sailors at Samar were 18 years old in 1944. They'd be approaching 100 now, and few remain. The annual reunions have ended. The last survivors too old to travel, too frail to gather. Soon there will be no one left who was actually there, who actually saw what happened, who can speak from personal memory rather than history books. But the story survives. The battle is taught at the Naval Academy, studied at the Naval War College, referenced in doctrine and training. New generations of naval officers learn about Ernest Evans charging the Yamato, about the Samuel B, Roberts fighting a battleship, about pilots making dry runs with empty guns. They learn what's possible when men decide that failure is not an option. The Battle off Samar was not the largest naval battle of World War II. It was not the most strategically important. It did not involve the most ships or cause the most casualties, but it may be the most inspiring because it demonstrated beyond any doubt or qualification that courage matters. That will matters. That determination and refusal to yield can overcome apparently insurmountable odds. 7 ships against 23. Tin cans against battleships. Impossible odds. Suicide mission. Fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. They fought anyway. They did what damage they could. And they won. That morning off Samar, that crystalline dawn that should have ended in massacre, instead became something else. It became proof that men can do the impossible if they simply refuse to accept that it's impossible. It became a demonstration of courage that transcends nationality and war and time. It became, quite simply, one of the finest hours in the history of naval warfare. The Japanese had the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, a floating fortress armed with the heaviest guns ever put to sea. The Americans had the Johnston, a tin can with 5-inch guns. And when those two forces met, when the mathematics said one thing and courage said another, courage won. That's the story of Samar. That's what happened on October 25th, 1944. 7 ships held the line. They held it because they had to. They held it because men like Ernest Evans and Robert Copeland decided that their duty was more important than their survival. They held it because when the moment came, when the ultimate test arrived, they did not flinch. Remember that. Remember the men who charged battleships and destroyers. Remember the crews who fired their guns until the barrels glowed. Remember the pilots who dove with empty guns. Remember that on one morning in 1944, off a small island in the Philippines, ordinary men did extraordinary things. Remember Taffy 3. Remember the battle off Samar. Remember that courage is real, that honor matters, that sometimes, just sometimes, right makes might rather than the other way around. They were tin cans. They fought battleships, and they won. Never forget that.